Hi, welcome back to Healthy Little Moments Expert Insights. I'm Dorota. I'm the heart behind the brand here. And today I am so excited to introduce you to one of my mentors who I will be interviewing, and we'll have a discussion around mentorship. I'm so thankful that he is on with us today because somebody I've known for almost a decade, right, Chuck? I think almost a
A little
decade.
more than that, yeah.
Yep, probably more than that. Oh my goodness, time flies. He started off as a career mentor for me at a company that we both worked at. And then over time, he became,
I do believe we first met each other. You were in Newark, I was in Minneapolis at Prudential. It was 2007, so that is more than a decade.
my goodness, that's right.
But it wasn't until maybe 5, 6 years ago that actually 7 years ago we started to communicate more regularly, and really the mentorship built from there, and a friendship for sure. I'm just so happy for all the things you're doing in your life. And from a background perspective, I'm in a transition right now that I will give up my full-time role in May of 2025. And I realized that it was 50 years ago in September that I got my first job, a W-2 employee. I was at a restaurant, so I was a cook and a dishwasher at age 15. I'll be 65 this year. And it really struck me that working full-time has been such an important part of my life to pay the bills. And really all of us have people we associate with, our families, our friends, all of us want to work, or for the most part need to work. So I've been doing that for 50 years. Before getting into the financial services or the insurance industry, which was 1981. So about, 6 years after I started working, I did everything. I ended up becoming an assistant manager of the restaurant I worked for at a very young age. I was a swimming enthusiast, a lifeguard, waterfront director for a camp. I worked in a hospital I was thinking hospital administration would be a good career. So I got a job as a ward clerk and an orderly, and took dead people to the morgue, which is really eye-opening, right?
Yeah, I didn't know that.
And like you had mentioned to me, Dorota, I did more than one job at a time. My family didn't have a lot of extra funds to pay for college or anything else. So bought my first car when I was 16 with my own money, just really kind of built it from there. But since then, in the financial services industry, I really have had an opportunity to really contribute to some really great companies, including Prudential, where we met, and just all the while kind of developing a passion around the business that I'm in, which is we provide protection for families. And that's hit home for me with two experiences. One, getting a crazy experience getting lost in Death Valley in 2011 with a rental car that stalled, and spending 8 or 9 hours walking to civilization, not knowing if I would ever find civilization in all things Death Valley. I think I found lights at 2 a.m. and finally reached those lights at 3 or 3:30 a.m. But it made me realize just how important protection was. And then I'm a cancer survivor. So in 2020, if the pandemic wasn't enough, I was diagnosed with cancer. Thankfully, early detection. Just had my fourth year scan, and I am cancer free. And it's all kind of led to me being an enthusiastic champion for the life insurance industry and learning how to become a manager of people. And I appreciate your comments about me being positive. Not everyone embraces that. But
Mhm.
thankfully, especially the company I'm with now and Prudential too, really recognize that people are way more productive. And I think exponentially, like 5 times more productive if they're happy and
Mm-hmm.
motivated and energized and engaged. And so that's been kind of the signature for me for the last literally 20 years, managing salespeople and managing sales organization as being positive, really focused on the future in a very good way, and that you could do anything you want. You just have to dream big and get it done. So that's kind of been me. And like I said, I'll be making a big change here in 25 and hoping to do more opportunities like this where I get to work with people and share about the mentoring and other skills that I developed over those years. Very humbly, but very, very much want to do that.
That's going to be a really important transition, and I'm excited for you for that. I'm sure you're going to be successful in whatever opportunity you pick up, because there are going to be many. And I want to lean into something you said about being positive. And, it maybe directly or indirectly ties into mentorship, but how do you stay positive in a work environment when those around you might not be positive? Because you've been a great influence on me when we've talked many times. when, I might have had a difficult boss or a difficult situation. But then you as a leader, a lot of times, and many people who are listening might want to be leaders, right? Your daily interactions might be with people who are not so positive. So how do you kind of keep that light in your career, Chuck?
That's a great question. And I really do focus on that because no matter where you are, no matter who you work with, you're going to run into negativity, either from external forces. And you know what? There's not a work team in my history, which has been many years and many teams, where there wasn't some level of tension. And what I've just determined, and somewhat recently, because even in my current role, I work on a great team, but you're always going to run into people that are either complaining about something you're doing, or they just, like you said, they just, no matter what, can't be positive. So I've really learned to just stay the course. And the mantra that from me, Dorota, is the low ego, no drama, big impact. Recently added the fourth word is integrity, is that you need to operate with integrity. So I've sort of expanded my little mantra. Hope to do some writing about that. I've even have a book draft about low ego, no drama, big impact, and adding integrity and how to operate in the corporate environment. And you very simply have to stay the course, and you have to decide at the beginning of the day that I'm going to make a positive impact. I'm going to run into challenges, but I'm going to maintain my positivity. And I have found day in and day out that it's contagious. Yeah. It's amazing when the culture shifts with leaders, especially those that are positive. It's very noticeable. And, I'm sure there's opportunities I've had over the years that didn't go perfectly, but the one I'm in most recently has turned out great because the vast majority of my colleagues, the people that report to me, have just really picked up on the positivity, and it's working. And so I'm going to stick with that. I'd say one more thing, and that is a couple of the home office people that I work with. So I'm in the sales side of the organization. But the chief underwriter is a friend of mine. The leader of our executive VP of ops operations came to me recently, and they just said, the other thing that I bring to the table is kindness. And they even asked me if I would consider writing a TED talk just about kindness. And it sounds so simple, but if you really spread that and work and make that part of your DNA in your work life, it makes a big difference. And it's up to you. It's up to every individual to decide if they're going to be positive and kind. There are people that resist that. They want bosses to be the ones that are, pushing people around, and they want people to operate from fear. And some of those people you can't change. Yep. And I did have a job and had maybe 5 big jobs in the life industry. There was one that I chose to leave, and it was because of the fact that the leadership there actually just told me they just didn't like that work style, that they wanted to work with more of a fear. They didn't want partnerships with the other areas that supported us. They wanted it to be a adversarial relationship. And so I, in a very respectful way, I just said, that's not me. I gave them 6 months notice and wrapped up there without a job at age 60. Turned out I was able to find one fairly quickly. And that just proved to me that staying the course is the right plan.
Absolutely. And staying true to your morals and what you see for yourself. So that was a big
stick with it.
What's that?
Just write it down and stick with it. Exactly. Decide yourself what your mantra is, what you think is important, and just stick with it.
I love that. And you'll have to let us know when your book launches. I wrote down that title. I think that's really powerful. Very strong mantra.
Yeah, I will.
So let's jump into the why we're having this conversation and why mentorship is so important to you and your journey through it. Maybe we could talk about why you feel that mentorship is so essential in your professional life and personal life. So we can touch on one or both.
Yeah, I'll start with professional. And it's really been good to think back to how mentorship helped me over the years. I joined Prudential as a 20-year-old, hadn't finished college yet. They had a tuition reimbursement, so I did take advantage of that and finished my college degree within I had about, a year and a half left, and ended up taking 3 years because I was working full time there. But once I got into the corporate culture there, the corporate environment, I realized that they had some really cool jobs. And, totally honest here, that They paid well. And I was starting to really grasp just how important insurance was to families. And so I made it very clear early on that I wanted to advance, and that they are a company, as you know, Dorota, that provides advancement opportunities. And at the time, this was 1981 and 1982. That was when it was before PCs, but it was when we called them green screen computers, and it was kind of mainframe versus PC. And Prudential had a very, very large systems organization that used the programming language called COBOL. They created their own compiler called PruCOBOL, of course, very similar to regular COBOL. And everybody in the company that was a young person was like, you got to get into systems. You need to learn how to become a programmer. They were hiring like crazy. There was tons of jobs. And I just thought I would try it. And they did have us take an aptitude test. You do need to be logical. So thankfully, I have enough left brain skills. I'm mostly a right brain person, but I had enough left brain skills and talents that allowed me to pass the aptitude test. But I also figured out that I needed to, and I didn't know what the word mentor meant back then, but I became acquainted with one of the managers and then an individual that was a very senior level programmer in an area called new business systems. So they were the ones that wrote the code for all the policies that get produced by the company right there in Minneapolis. It was a remote location to their Newark headquarters, but they were able to find really talented programmers in the Twin Cities. So I became one of those. And in addition to identifying those mentors, kind of my secret sauce back then was that when you got hired as a programmer, at the time I was in data processing, so I was literally not programming. I was doing more manual type computer work. They had Prudential COBOL training that took about 6 weeks to complete. And whenever they would hire a new programmer or a new class of programmers, for 6 weeks, they would spend in the training area. At the same time, the data processing department was switching to a 3-day work week, which was kind of cool. 3 days, 12.5-hour shifts in the computer room. Well, that allowed me to say that I had 2 other days of the week, generally speaking, actually, 4 if you include the weekend, to work on my own. And so I just went to my mentor, the manager of the systems area that I was hoping to work for someday, and I asked if there was any reason why I couldn't take the programming training on my own time.
Wow.
Probably one of the smartest things I ever did, because there was at least 35 others that were in my age range that were hoping to get into the systems department. And when they put a job posting up at that time, they actually took it down and they made the rare move. They sometimes would just move somebody versus posting, which I think posting is always the way to go. But they had an immediate need and they selected me for the job. Now, there was a lot of controversy. I probably did make a few people mad that I kind of shot past about 35 people to get that job. But they very simply told everyone that, well, he took the programming training on his own time and he's ready to go now. And you know what? Everybody kind of understood. I'm sure there was a couple people that probably decided they would never like me again because I did that. But I did it for myself. I had a good mentor that helped me get it done. And it proved to me that if you take a creative route sometimes, think outside the box. So it was February of 1982, I started working as a programmer at Prudential. And that was a huge breakthrough, a big salary increase. And it taught me that latching on to people, that was about the time that I figured out what mentoring meant and started to make it more of a formal part of my life. So that was over 40 years ago. And I've been involved with mentoring ever since. So I'm a big believer in it.
It's powerful because that one decision, that one outside the box decision completely changed or could have changed the trajectory of your career to where you are today, which is, that's a powerful story. And that's one of I think, the biggest benefit that I see from mentorship and that I've experienced as well are those outside the box ideas, is brainstorming with somebody, sharing maybe a problem or a situation or a goal. And hey, I'm here and I want to go to point B. Here are some ways that, I see these roadblocks, and a good mentor will talk you through those roadblocks and help show you the other open doors that there are to get to that destination. I think that's what's so powerful. And somebody more experienced, not just a peer or a friend, which is also sometimes helpful, but in a different capacity. So That's a powerful story of how you got started. And so maybe we could share one of your biggest success stories in a traditional mentorship role. And when we talk about why mentorship can be really powerful, maybe that you've helped a team. And I hate to lead a question, but at some point in your answer, I would love to hear how one of the sales teams I'm leading, because I know your history here, but I'd love for you to also touch on a team that when you started was mainly a male team and you helped advanced and open doors for women. So if you could touch on that, and then maybe outside of that, just share a success story for a mentee that you helped.
I'd be happy to. I'll start with the team that I managed. And I think that has been a very big, important part of my career is wanting to embrace the future. Corporate America has come a long way since I started in the early 90s. I was actually involved at Prudential when they formed they called it Eagles, the Employee Association for Gays and Lesbians. So I think it's called Pride today at Prudential. That was in the mid 90s. And so they were looking for an executive sponsor, and everyone was very, if you could remember back, and you're way too young to remember corporate at that time, but there was discrimination, and jumped right into that. And I stayed with it until the Supreme Court decision when gay marriage was approved across the United States. That's been so rewarding. And the other thing about corporate America, especially the financial services industry, is it's a very male-dominated world.
Oh, yeah.
In the time that I've been in the sales side of the organization, I've seen tremendous progress with moving more women into leadership positions. At the time, 2004 was when I was asked to manage a team of 16 regional vice presidents. I was barely 42 years old. All of them were older than me. I think we had one woman actually two, Susan and Lily were on the team. Everybody was older than me, but I was really appreciated the fact that they saw me as a leader, even though I was chronologically younger than them. And I think that was when I realized too that being their advocate, not just their boss, but their advocate made a difference. And they knew that I was going to work hard to help the organization grow. But I also had the vast majority, all but two of them were males and over age 50, maybe a couple over age 60. And that was a really difficult process because you can't, in terms of being positive and kind and also having integrity, I wasn't going to just start firing people. But we were able to at Prudential, and a number of large companies do this. There are programs and there's approaches that can be taken to allow people to accelerate their retirement. And in fact, that ended up being used with my situation at age 57 when I retired after 36 years with Pru, that I was able to take that early retirement. So over the course of between 2004 and 2009, we flipped the group essentially through very good processes using early retirement to the point where it was at that time 6 females and 8 males. And I think you know some of the women that joined that. One in particular that stands out is Kathy Beckman. Her name was Kathy Sullivan when I recruited her in 2007. It was just really contagious to watch the energy come in, how smart she was. And what I loved about her is that no one could intimidate her. There were some old timers there that kind of didn't know that they really quite embraced what I was trying to do. But early on, she just really hung in there and showed them how it's done. And I'd say of all the things that I did in that time at Prudential, which was a long career there, was the flip. And now I get to keep in touch. I'm on the other side as a BGA. I work very closely with them as one of their customers, one of their distributors. And I just can't tell you how proud I am when I look on LinkedIn or I talk to my old colleagues there, especially the women that I became great friends with, and find out just how successful they are. I was telling somebody we did $100 million of premium in 2003. By 2009 or 10, it was getting close to $500 million, and now they're on their way to $1 billion. So obviously it's working. And you have to learn, I think, at some point that it's not about you, it's about the company. And so it was good for me to move on. And that was scary to take early retirement. It wasn't a choice, I'll be very honest. It was, and I will give you this or nothing. And you know, I learned a lot about myself going through that at age 57, that there is life after many, many years in a big company. And that kind of led to the second story where I'm very, very happy to be friends with a woman named Nancy at the company I worked at after Prudential. I just saw her as a rising star, and that was a company located in St. Paul that was even more traditional in terms of not necessarily recognizing that women could be leaders. And along the way, and I didn't stay there as long, it was just over 3 years. And it was the right time for me to move when I did move. But I very much wanted to be replaced by Nancy. And so she's a very dear friend, very talented individual in many respects, better than me at many parts of the job. And she and I developed a mentoring relationship early on. And she probably would say that I was more a mentor for her, but she helped me tremendously. Leaving there when I did, that was about the time I was finishing up my cancer recovery. Handing her the leadership of that team was one of those bright spots in my career, that when you can actually replace yourself with somebody who you also have a mentoring relationship with, that will stand out forever as one of the best accomplishments of my life. So I still keep in touch with her today, and she's doing great. And I'm also a customer of theirs too, because they're a carrier in St. Paul nationally here too, and DBS is one of their BGAs. So I get to work with the people for the companies I used to work. So it's kind of cool too.
That is a great story, to really build that person up and see them replace you. That's actually a great example of an advocate, actually. I think that's a level beyond a mentor, and that's where you're helping shape and drive the career of somebody, and perhaps talking about them in a good light behind closed doors. And that's how I see an advocate. So I wanted to touch on that, actually. So thank you for that great transition, because I want to touch on the different types of mentors and kind of jump into some of the more tactical questions of how to find a mentor, the right mentor. And I think first it's to identify what kind of mentor you need, because as you and I started, we were in a very traditional mentorship relationship, right? We would meet maybe once a month, or then later once a quarter for a predefined period of time, where it was maybe a year or so, and then you kind of reevaluate, right? That's more traditional. And a lot of times that structure is found in the same company, right? So you find somebody in the same company, you reach out, and it could be a company sponsored mentor and mentorship program, or you could just indirectly reach out to somebody, which I've done both many, many times, and both have been successful. And then you also have peer mentors and colleagues who you can turn to and gain advice from, and maybe that offers some collaborative learning. There's actually I considered a peer mentee who's been reaching out to me. He lost his job, and we get on calls, I'd say maybe once a month, and he kind of runs through where he's at in his hiring process. And he just says to me, and I admire this, he'll say to me, what am I missing? This is how the interview went. Here's what I did. Here's the question that I was kind of stuck on. What do you think? What do you see here? And I say that vulnerability has really helped him grow. And I don't want to say it's my advice that's helping him grow. It's more like, hey, have you thought about this? And going back to what we talked about earlier, Chuck, is thinking outside the box. Like, here's another way you can position that answer or question. And then we, of course, have industry mentors, which I mentioned you were my industry mentor. And the most important is that champion or advocate. And the way I see mentors turning into champions or advocates is when you go from a close working relationship where your mentor truly gets to know you. They get to know your skill sets, and they like you. They like your work. They admire your work, and then they can recommend you for jobs, for opportunities. And I think that has been really powerful in my career and in many people's career who really stick to mentorship. So I just wanted to share that for the listeners, because I think there's a differentiator there. And I also want to mention that you can have one of each, and you can have multiple mentors, and that's really important as well. So I want to just take the next few minutes as we wrap up to talk about how to find a mentor. In today's day and age, how would you recommend somebody to go out there and ask somebody, or what type of platforms should they use? So I'll turn that over and love some guidance there.
Absolutely. And I thought a lot about this, because the majority of my decisions about mentors have really been, I guess, rather selfish, that I've wanted to achieve something, or I aspired to reach a certain level in my career position. And I look back to one of the times where I was really focused on becoming, I really wanted to become an executive leader. So I was about 39. This is in 1999. Things were going great at Prudential. I was in a very high level role. I was actually still in the systems organization, but I wanted more. It was about that time was when Prudential was preparing to go public. So there was a little bit of a stall. And I think that all of us at times are ready for the next move, but it's not necessarily going to happen at the company you're at. And so whether it's internal or external, finding a mentor that is doing what you want to do next is probably what served me the best. And I want to be real clear about that, that you mentioned a number of different types of mentors, and they are so valuable. You can't have too many, though.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And so when you're at the point, I have a feeling that most of those listening to us right now are thinking about where they want to go in their career, which I think is so natural. It's basically what I've been doing for most of the past 40 years. And finally at the point where I want to basically do my own thing after this job. But for the prior 40 years, most of those I was looking at where do I want to go next. And at the age of 39, I really wanted to move into executive leadership. And we didn't have the internet in the late 90s. We started to, but there were a lot of good articles in magazines. You might have heard the publication called Fast Company was big at
Oh, yeah.
that time. It still exists today. There was a write-up in Fast Company about the CEO of Life USA that was also in Minneapolis. His name is Bob McDonald. He's still alive. He's been retired for years. He's probably in his 80s. But here I was, 39 years old. I was in a relatively high level, kind of middle management role at Prudential. Was having a great experience there, but I wanted to move up and it just wasn't looking like it was going to happen in the near term. And I guess the advice I wanted to share today is that don't hesitate to go bigger than you think, because I made the very bold move to send an email and actually called this CEO named Bob McDonald at Life USA, a company that's 50 minutes away from Prudential's Minneapolis office. And he answered and he spoke with and he met with me. And I had been with Prudential about 18 years at that point, and we began a mentoring relationship. And the first thing I told him is I had read the article about him is that he was very big on positivity. Life USA was a startup company in the 80s and 90s. It actually, soon after I met Bob, within a couple of years, was acquired by Allianz Life. But when I met Bob, he was still the CEO of Life USA. He didn't mention the acquisition, but that'll come into the story later because he was talking to them at that point. But he was more than happy to meet with me. We met monthly for a while, usually over lunch. He enjoyed a couple of restaurants in between our offices, and they were just the best meetings. Along the way then, and he knew exactly what I was interested in, he said, I have a senior level need here at Life USA. What would you think about going back, tendering your resignation and coming and working for me at Life USA? And that shocked me. I think I just happened to have my paycheck in my vest. Back then we wore suits every day, so my paycheck was in my vest pocket. And he said, well, how much do you get paid now? And I said, I pulled it out and showed it to him. And he said, well, I'll pay you 25% more with that work. And we were a young family at that point. I was a little restless. I said yes within about a couple days. And you know what? It turned out to be the best decision I ever made, but also the most challenging. That when you go work directly for a CEO as the new guy, I could do a whole podcast about all the things that happen to you when you leave the comfort of your current company and just take this big step. But it was so life-changing for me. I only was with him for 3 years. He actually retired within 3 years of me joining him. Soon after I took the job, he said, well, one of the reasons I asked you to join is we were being acquired. Need somebody to shepherd the acquisition or the merger and all the acquisition activity that's happening, from systems to marketing to sales to operations to product. And I got to work on everything. It was probably like the best master class in running corporate America. But it just shows that had I not reached out to Bob on my own, and there were a lot of people that would say, he won't return the call. There were people who knew I was reaching out there, and they thought there's no way he's going to pick up the phone or actually answer your email. And they were wrong. He did.
Yeah.
He's an author too. I have his book on my shelf here. I just looked at here. I was thinking recently that I should reach out to him. I mean, he's in his 80s. He lives in, I think he moved to the Florida Keys, which is smart when you're in Minnesota to go south. But I wanted to thank him because one of the things he did when he was at Life USA that showed me that he really was into positivity and motivation is that they had a very, very successful year. So he called one of the local high schools and had them bring their marching band to the headquarters, which is an office building not far from my home. And he had the marching band basically march through the entire building on every floor. And when I read that, that's when I called him and it said, that was so cool. I wanted to meet you because I love, and I learned so many other things about how he managed from a positive standpoint. And that's why I thought very recently I should let him know that that pivot point made all the difference. Turned out that I went back to Prudential when I was done working with Bob. They did want me to stay at Allianz, but it was so different after he left. And thankfully, Prudential, I left on good terms, was expanding again. Things had really broken wide open. And honestly, had I not left and come back, I would have never gotten the jobs that I got from 2003 to 2018 when I retired. It was all pivoted off of that extra experience I had. In addition to taking the programming training on my own time in 1981 and 82, reaching out to Bob McDonald as a mentor who thought no one thought would call me back was also one of the smartest things I did. So I hope that's a good story to share.
Thank you for that. That was actually a perfect transition because I hear you saying to make the outreach, to be bold. And I think those are really important if we think about the tactical, because if you're never going to make the phone call, you're never going to connect with a CEO who could offer you a job. That's so important. And I think that's a really great place for us to pause and to wrap up. I know we've reflected on so much today, both key takeaways on in your career and success stories from mentors in your career, which got you where you are today. Just one final question, just as if we wrap up, if you could leave our listeners with just one piece of advice for both mentors, mentees, whoever's listening, what would that be?
You know, for me, it would be to be vulnerable. And I've learned that because of being on both sides. It's interesting that for the first 20 years of my career, I think most of my outreaches were to find mentors. And it was so cool that as I moved into more senior level roles that I began to get asked to be a mentor. And that was so rewarding. But what I found is as a mentor, that I can tell you, and when we talk, I don't have all the answers. There is no perfect corporate person out there. There's no boss that's perfect. I've found so many things over the years where everybody needs feedback, what they're doing and how they're approaching things. And what's great about mentoring is you develop a trust relationship. And I can't emphasize that word trust more because I felt it happen with when we started working together, Dorota, other key relationships. And as I worked down over the years, I think, wow, the number of people that I've really had a genuine level of trust with isn't the majority. It's not, I've had great relationships, but when you reach that level of trust with a mentor and be selective, you know, if you find somebody that you don't think you're going to develop that, wait, you know, go ahead and bring that to a close and work toward another mentor. And I say be vulnerable because I've really learned as a mentor to open up about the things that I'm having challenges with. And that way you and your mentee, you and the mentor can work on those together. And there's no better feedback. It's like your family, really, right? That you trust them to tell you exactly what's going on. And it's amazing when you can both deliver and receive constructive feedback from somebody that you trust and that you have a trust relationship with. And I know for a fact, and here I am, I guess, year 44 of my insurance career, year 50 of being an employee, that I'm still making improvements and adjustments. And as recently as a month ago, I had a pretty heart-to-heart talk with my boss about some things that he pointed out that I'm working to improve upon. And I think as a mentor, you can provide that to your mentee. And I think as a mentee, you're helping them because if they develop that trust level, they'll start to be able to pick up on things that you can help them with. So it's definitely a two-way street. Be vulnerable, think big, don't limit yourself, and find people that you think will help you. Not too many again, but at least a couple people, and maybe one in particular at any given time will make all the world of difference and good for your career. So I really encourage people to do that, and I hope we get to talk about this again.
great way to wrap it up. Thank you for that bit of advice. That's a really great place for us to pause. And I'll encourage listeners one more time that if you're on the fence, get a mentor. It has helped Chuck tremendously as he has shared. And for all the listeners out there, make sure that you click subscribe because we're going to be following this up with quite a few other episodes on similar topics, especially if you want some direction in your career. And I thank the listeners for joining. And Chuck, I thank you so much for your time. It has been invaluable information. And everybody have a great night.
And thanks for letting me be part of that. I look forward to being with you again, Dorota.
Thank you. Bye.